Well, hello. This is Brian Rakita. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Quality Certification Services. And today at our weekly open client meeting, we have invited our Organic Program Director, Beth Rota, to give us some educational materials about Organic Producer Group certification from the client perspective. This is what we formerly called grower groups, but now, as it's been specified, these can be crop or livestock under the NOP. They're now producer groups. And without any more delay, I'll turn this over to Beth.
Thanks, Brian. As Brian said, I'll be talking about the requirements for Organic Producer Group certification under the USDA National Organic Program that has codified the rules for producer groups under strengthening organic enforcement that goes into effect next March, and also under the EU organic production rules that are transitioning to the EU 2018-848 production rules. And so today I'll be explaining the parameters of producer group certification and what QCS is evaluating, how it differs for our regular certification for an individual operator. So like Brian said, there is some lingo around what a producer group is. We used to just call it grower groups because they were for crop producers only, but under both regulations now, they can be for any type of farm operation that can function as a group with an internal control system, a crop operation or a livestock operation, or in the case of the European Union, a aquaculture operation. So the regulations refer to them a little differently. Under the NOP, they call them producer groups. Under the EU regulations, they're called group of operators. And just to stick with one term that is the fewest syllables, we're going with producer group. So the USDA organic regulations have a definition for a producer group operation. And this is about as detailed into the regulatory text that I'm going to get today. But I have made a little cheat sheet for you to understand whether my slide, a particular slide, refers to the USDA regulations or the EU regulations by including the organic seal for each of those. So this one here is for the USDA. Other slides, you may see the EU organic logo when I'm referring to that regulation. And the reason why I'm doing them both at the same time is to cover the parts that overlap or differ, because many producer group operations are located in third countries, so outside of the US and outside of the EU, and are certifying to and exporting to both markets, so have to comply with both standards. There's a little bit of difference between the standards, but for a producer, you're probably not going to see the differences. They mostly refer to how many members have to be inspected by QCS. So if you're just certifying to one or the other, you might not recognize that there's a difference between the standards, but I'll still go over what they are. But in general, what's defined in each of the separate regulations is a best practice for all producer groups. So we'll be talking about that today as well. So the USDA defines a producer group operation at 7 CFR 2052 as a producer organized as a person consisting of producer group members and production units in geographic proximity, governed by an internal control system under one organic system plan and certification. So that's a great definition really for regardless of the standard that you're applying to, because those requirements apply to both. Okay, well, let's talk about what are the general requirements for organic certification under both of those rules. We assess compliance with the standards through our organic producer group plan. We have a organic producer group plan that's part of an organic system plan. that an applicant will need to fill out to explain how they comply with either or both of the standards. And this is in addition to the plan for the specific scope, so the specific type of production that you're producing organic crops for, or organic products for, whether it's crops or livestock. Got to fill out that plan, but also then the producer group plan to explain how you're organized and operating as a group and complying with the requirements for a group of operators. First, we're going to talk about the producer group structure and the requirements. And this is applicable to both standards. A group needs to be organized as a legal entity. So it has to have, under the USDA, they call it as a person. Under the EU, just as a legal entity, there has to be a legal association of the members of the group as an individual entity. They have to use centralized processing, distribution, and marketing. They have to establish an internal control system that oversees compliance of the group and its members. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and the details of the internal control system. Members have to be located within geographic proximity. So under the EU, they have to be all in the same country. And under the USDA, that geographic proximity isn't defined, but we generally refer to it as being close enough to the central internal control system that they can have regular and adequate oversight of the producers, of all producers within the group. They have to use shared practices, resources, and record keeping. So they're producing the same type of products, using the same input stream, and using the same systems, operating essentially under the same organic system plan. Only members can market organic products through the group. So as the group is selling organic products, they can only be produced by the members of that group. And members cannot market their organic products outside of the group unless they have an individual organic system plan and are certified as an individual entity to be marketing organic products. So their certificate as part of the group is only for sale of organic products through the group. Membership is limited to one group for the same product. So a farmer can't be producing the same crop or the same livestock product and selling it through multiple groups as organic. There has to be an annual internal compliance inspection of each member. An internal compliance inspection means by the group itself, the internal control system of that group. And there has to be an annual review by the certifier of the group as a whole. And that includes an inspection, an on-site inspection of the group. Under the EU, there's some more specific size limitations on producer groups. They have to be smaller than or equal to 2,000 members. So there's a maximum number of members. And the entire holding of each member has to be less than or equal to 5 hectares. Or, this is where I meant to say or the individual certification would have to be too costly for a member to get individual certification. And there's some parameters around that as well. Individual certification for a farm would have to be more than 2% of their annual gross sales that are less than 25,000 euros a year, or their annual gross sales would have to be less than 15,000 euros in a year. So some very strict size limitations coming from the EU, both in terms of the group as a whole and how many members it can have, and the production output or acreage of the members of the group. Just reiterating that under the EU, group certification is for smallholders that are not able to access organic certification on their own due to the costs. Here I have just a screenshot. I know it's hard to read, but just wanted to illustrate that that the groups each have to maintain a member list, and we have, as part of our organic system plan application, an Excel spreadsheet that you use to convey information about the members to QCS. Next, I'm going to talk about the requirements for an internal control system, also called an ICS. This is another aspect where the USDA offers a definition. An internal control system is defined at 7 CFR 2052 as an internal quality management system that establishes and governs the review, monitoring, training, and inspection of the producer group operation, and the procurement and distribution of shared production and handling inputs and resources to maintain compliance with the USDA organic regulations. And while the EU 848 doesn't offer the same definition, it does offer very detailed parameters on what an internal control system does and who participates in the internal control system. But I'll just go over a general description of an internal control system and how it is expected to work under both standards. So an internal control system is, you're going to describe that to QCS in your application, and we ask for all of this information. You don't have to remember it from the presentation, because the application specifically asks for you to describe these different aspects of your internal control system and how it works. First of all, we're asking about the structure of the internal control system and the roles and responsibilities of the personnel who are participating, not just as members, but as the participants in the control system itself. Under the EU, they require that the person who is managing the internal control system and the inspectors who conduct those internal inspections of the members are different people. Your internal control system should describe what your geographic proximity criteria are for members and production units within your group. The description of your control system should also explain where your production units are and their locations. And a production unit, this is another piece that's defined in the USDA regulations as a group of operators producing a similar, same product within a geographic region. Your description of your internal control system should also describe the measures you have in place to prevent conflicts of interest and retribution. Conflicts of interest would be, to prevent someone doing an inspection of someone they have a business relationship with or a family member. Preventing retribution would be, ensuring there's measures in place that make sure that your internal inspectors aren't penalized for identifying non-compliances, for identifying problems if a member isn't following the organic system plan or complying with the applicable organic regulations. Your internal control system should also describe your mechanisms to accept new members or new activities of existing members, how you're going about with the initial inspection of new members, and determining compliance for those new members before accepting them and adding them to the group. Some other aspects include your procedures for conducting an annual inspection of all of the members, for inspector training and assessment for your internal inspectors. How are you training them, and how are you assessing that the training was effective? How are you training members so that they understand the requirements of the applicable organic production rules, and that they understand the group's organic system plan, how to implement it, and what their responsibilities are as members of the group for implementing the organic system plan to produce the organic products that the group is certified for. Also want to understand how the internal control system controls documents and records, and the measures and follow-up procedures that you will take in case that you identify non-compliances internally, how you follow up on them and what measures will be taken, and also how will it be documented. We also want to understand the internal traceability for the movement of products within the internal control system. That has to do both with inputs that are going onto the farms, whether it's livestock feed or seeds or inputs that are used in organic production, and also the traceability of products from the individual members to collection centers for distribution by the group and marketing of the organic products. Under the EU, they have very specific regulations about what are the responsibilities of the internal control system manager. And so the organic system plan will have to demonstrate that you have a designated manager that carries out these responsibilities. The ICS manager is responsible for verifying the eligibility of members for participation in the group, for maintaining a membership agreement, and the EU regulations have very detailed requirements for what needs to be in the membership agreement, that they manage the record keeping for the whole group, and the procedures for record keeping, even if they're not keeping all the records themselves, that they maintain the membership list, they approve members, and that they implement measures in cases of non-compliance. The ICS manager is responsible for assigning and scheduling the internal inspections, for communication with the certifier, verifying annual conflict of interest statements from internal inspectors, and also training and assessing the inspectors annually. Next, we want to understand that the manager of the internal control system is responsible for notifying the certifier of any internal findings. And this includes suspicion of major and critical non-compliance, suspension or withdrawal of a member or a production unit or premises because you've found non-compliances internally that can't be corrected. And anytime that the manager has prohibited placing a product on the market as organic, or in the case of EU, in conversion, and notifying QCS of the member that's concerned, the product, and the quantities and lots that are prohibited from being marketed as organic from that member. Along with this, our Excel spreadsheet with the producer group members also has a tab for you to list any members that have been removed from your group, so that were previously part of your group and have been removed either because they left voluntarily or because of findings that could not be corrected. And this should be updated regularly to QCS so we understand who's a member in real time. We also ask for you to describe your enforcement activities that have happened and maintain this and submit it at least once a year with your organic system plan, is to describe any enforcement non-compliances or other measures that have been taken to either bring an operation, a member into compliance if it's correctable, or to remove a member from the group. We want to see that those have been implemented and carried out and followed through on. And so we have a tab within our spreadsheet for you to use. Next, we'll talk about the requirements for on-site inspections, the official controls of the group of members. So the purpose of QCS doing an on-site inspection of the producer group, we're doing it differently than we would of an individual farm, because we're not going to every single member and inspecting every single member. Instead, we're using a visit annually to the producer group as a whole, and sampling a sample of the members, where we go on site and do inspections with a sample of the members to assess the setup and the functioning of the internal control system. We'll also be using that time to review the internal inspections that are conducted by the internal control system. So we'll be making sure that you're capturing non-compliances, that you've done a thorough inspection, that your inspectors are trained, and that we'll also compare the results of the internal control systems inspections for the members we're visiting with our own findings. We're also going to witness a number of your inspectors in action. So we'll do like a witness audit where we'll come along and watch them doing an internal inspection. And that's part of us evaluating, is your internal control system effective at ensuring your members are compliant with your organic production rules, that they're following your organic system plan, and that when they're not, that you're effectively preventing them from selling products as organic that aren't in compliance. So it's a little bit different than us evaluating the compliance of every individual member. In a producer group situation, it's the responsibility of the internal control system to maintain the compliance of the members, and the responsibility of the certifier to make sure that the internal control system is working. And we do that in part with our inspection of your group each year. So our inspection will include a meaningful inspection of the members of your group. For any group that has 10 or more members, we will be inspecting at least 10 members. We'll be inspecting all members that are considered, that we would consider high risk, and we have some internal criteria for how we determine a member to be high risk. Under the USDA, a meaningful number of members is determined by multiplying the number of members times 1.4 and then taking the square root of that. In the EU, it's risk-based. We do a risk assessment of the whole producer group and are either inspecting 5, 6, or 7% of members, depending on the risk that we determine that your operation has. And then if the operation is applying for certification to both the USDA and the EU, then we take whichever number is higher. We have a really fancy spreadsheet that lets our reviewers plug in some numbers and do that. And I'll show you how that works in this next slide here. This is an example. If there were 250 members in a producer group, if they were EU only, it would be based on the risk score for that group, low, medium, or high. But because the NOP number, using the calculation of 1.4 times the square root times the number of members, is higher than what we would get from the EU. If they were certifying to both standards, we would select 23 individual members to do an inspection of. Another example is if we had 1,000 members in a producer group, we can apply those same equations here, and we get different numbers where, in fact, the EU would be higher than the NOP in all cases, regardless of risk. And so if it were certified to both standards, we would select the number of members for the EU. Really, in either case, the regulations differ, but the purpose of these inspections is to allow the certifier to inspect a number of members for a meaningful sample of members. So we get a diversity of members where we're not inspecting all 250 or all 1,000 members of the producer group. So it saves a lot on the costs of certification, because the individual on-site inspections of those individual members are being done by the producer group itself, by the internal control system of the producer group in a manner that should be free of conflict of interest. But our purpose in inspecting these members is to evaluate the internal control system. Is the internal control system effective? And there are some specific deficiencies that we are looking for in the setup or the functioning of the internal control system. If any of these things are deficient, a producer group may have difficulty getting certified. We'll have to correct these issues before they can obtain certification. And if they're already certified and these specific deficiencies are identified, we'll have to correct them in order to continue certification. So if we determine that the internal control system is not able to detect non-compliances through its internal oversight, that shows that the internal control system isn't working. Also failing to notify QCS and updating the member list when members are suspended or withdrawn would be a problem. Representing products as organic from suspended or withdrawn members, or products that are blocked by the internal control system. The European system allows for blocking of products for sale if there's a suspicion of a non-compliance. And if those products get through and are represented as organic, it is indicative that the internal control system isn't working. Also, adding new members without following the internal approval procedure, which has been submitted to and approved by QCS as a mechanism for making sure the operator complies with the organic production rules and the plan of the producer group as a whole. Those have to be followed in order for those products to be sold as organic. Not carrying out the annual physical inspection of each member would also be a problem, because how can you have oversight of your membership if you're not doing the physical inspection each year to verify their compliance and implementation of the plan? Any serious deviations in findings between your internal inspections and QCS's external inspections would show a problem with the setup and the functioning of the internal control system. Also, any serious deficiencies in implementing measures or follow-up for non-compliances that are identified by the internal control system or by QCS. Simply identifying non-compliances isn't enough. You also have to follow up, make sure non-compliances are issued to the members, make sure that the members are correcting the non-compliances when possible, or measures such as removal from the group are in place if it's not possible to correct the non-compliances that you've identified or that QCS has identified externally. Lastly, it's a problem if you don't have enough internal inspectors to be conducting oversight, or the inspectors are not competent to be able to assess compliance and understand what's happening on the farms and carry out the internal inspections as described in the organic system plan. So that's it from me. Contact information for the QCS main office and our website, where all of our applications can be found. And we welcome any contact to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks a lot, Beth. I hope everyone who watches this video will find it useful. Feel free to be in touch with any questions. Christina, do you have any questions today?
No, thank you, Brian. So far, I'm so good listening. Beth was very nice. Thank you, Beth. Thank you for this great presentation.
Maybe I do have a question I can ask just to can you speak at all to the to fraud prevention and traceability within the group? How we'll verify that that all the crops that are marketed by the group are actually grown by group members and as part of our process for oversight?
That's a great question, Brian. And like everything with with producer groups, it's the responsibility of the internal control system to verify that there's a fraud prevention program in place and that all the crops being marketed through the group come from the members. So we will be looking at what your systems are to verify that. But it's a really, really great topic because fraud prevention is on all of our minds as we're learning about the strengthening organic enforcement regulation that goes into effect on March 19th, 2024. And that requires all organic system plans to have, as part of their plan, a description of how they will monitor their supply chains to prevent fraud. So that is a question that's in every organic system plan that QCS is releasing, that have been released so far, and that starting in 2024, the new organic system plans will need to be submitted to QCS. And you'll have to describe how you have a system in place that is working to monitor for and prevent fraud from both outside of your operations, so perhaps external suppliers, but also for fraud internal to your operation. And this is especially important for producer groups because you have so many members that are part of your operation that you have oversight of. And so one of the requirements for producer groups is about traceability, and you'll need to be doing a traceability audit and mass balance audit at every single one of your internal inspections of the producers and looking at their yields. And part of that will be if, many producers are selling organic products, but maybe they can't sell all of their products through the group because there's not enough demand for it. Well, even if they sold some of their products as non-organic to a different outlet, you would have to include that volume in your yield analysis and the mass balance audit that you're doing. And we'll also be doing mass balance audits of the producer groups of the members that we inspect. We'll be doing a yield analysis of that as well to be saying, are the amounts that they're selling through the group reasonable? But then the other piece that we'll be doing is also a traceability analysis to make sure that the products are traceable from the members the whole way through the sale by the group. So anything sold by the group should be traceable back to the member that is producing that product, but also should balance the amount of product that the group is collecting from the members should balance the amount of product the member is selling through the group as well. And so we'll be doing a deep dive into those records, but it's also the responsibility of the internal control system to be looking at those numbers. And, being part of a group where you have farmers that are in geographic proximity that are selling the same, producing the same products or the same group of products using the same practices, would expect that their yields would be quite similar. And so it is an opportunity for the group to be gathering information and looking for outliers in your data. If there are producers that have a much higher yield, there should be a reason for that you can document and explain internally as well as to QCS.
Thanks a lot, Beth. That's very useful. All right. With that, I think I can end the recording. Thank you again for joining me, and I hope you all are doing well. I'll talk to you later.